Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Today I'm reviewing a Great Northern S-2 class 484 locomotive from Broadway Limited. This model is part of Broadway's Brass Hybrid series and comes with a Paragon 3 DCC sound decoder pre-installed. BLI offers this model in several different road numbers with prototype-specific details in two different cab styles. Broadway's Brass Hybrid line models are constructed and detailed similarly to other brass models, but with a die-cast mechanism for reliable operation. My model is from the previous production run. It doesn't appear that Broadway has made any significant changes to the model since then. When I purchased my engine, the MSRP was $699.95. The current MSRP is $749.99. I got mine for $599.95 from a hobby shop near me. Since the MSRP has increased, I'd expect that the actual price for the new run will also be somewhat higher. We'll start the model at 100 possible points. The model is packaged in a cardboard box with a foam liner. Inside is some documentation and an owner's manual. The engine and tender are wrapped in thin, flexible plastic sheets to keep the models from sticking to or snagging on the foam. Exploded view drawings of the engine and tender are included. The owner's manual has information about how to operate the engine and sound system on both DC and DCC. Also inside the box are a small funnel for putting smoke fluid into the model, a spare set of traction tires, and a wrench for the side rods. Smoke fluid is not included. This is a good box that should protect the model for storage and transport. The prototype S2s were built in 1930 by Baldwin. The S2s had 80-inch drivers and a rounded firebox instead of the square Belpaire firebox used on many other GN locomotives. By the 1950s, they'd been repainted in black, so this model is most appropriate for the 1930s and 1940s era. My model is numbered 2584 and has an open cab. The real 2584 is the only surviving example of this class and is currently on display in Havre, Montana. The model seems to match photos of the real 2584 pretty well. The paint on this model is gorgeous. The separation lines between the green and the black are overall very sharp. The lettering is crisp. Even some of the tiny writing on the builder's plate is legible with magnification. The detail on plumbing in the engine is outstanding and seems to be a very close match to the real 2584. The ladders on the boiler are freestanding. I really like the thin window glazing in the cab. It's worth noting that the lack of rivet detail on the tender is prototypical. These locomotives were delivered with welded tenders, and the tender matches prototype photos. The front of the locomotive has the smoke box mounted air pumps common to several GN steam classes. The steps have diamond plate tread. The pilot features an uncoupling lever and air hoses. The uncoupling lever moves up and down. One of the number boards is slightly crooked. This is a common issue with brass models, but at this price I don't think it should be like that, so I'm taking 5 points. I really like the fact that this engine has a working knuckle coupler in front instead of a dummy. On my model, the long horizontal grab above the headlight has come detached on both ends and is only held on by the middle support. It's possible that's my fault. I might have knocked it loose while removing the model from the box. It looks like it should be a fairly easy fix. The cab has backhead detail and crew figures. The rear of the tender has freestanding ladders and a working backup light. The rear end lettering on the real 2584's tender as it is today is slightly different than on the model, but it could be that the engine was painted differently back in the day. The tender also has uncoupling levers and air hoses, though the pilot beam has molded on grabs, which are a bit out of character with the level of detail on the rest of the model. The top of the locomotive has excellent detail, even down to the tiny rivets in the boiler jacket. The tender has good hatch detail. In the rear, the water hatches have freestanding grabs. There's simulated wood grain on the deck. The underside of the engine has good brake detail and other plumbing. The drivers pick up currents from both sides. There are traction tires in the rearmost driver set. One of the traction tires on my model is cracked, but as I mentioned earlier, there are extra traction tires included in the box. The pilot and trailing wheels do not pick up electricity. There's a switch under the cab to turn the smoke unit on and off. There are holes in the bottom of the tender for the speakers. The front coupler is low according to the KD height gauge. The rear coupler is also low. All of the wheels on the engine and tender are in gauge according to the NMRA standards gauge. The tender picks up current from only one side of each truck and only from the outside axles. At this price, I think that all of the wheels should be used for electrical pickup as on many other models, so I'm taking 5 points. There's no body wobble. The locomotive and tender are connected by a slotted drawbar and an 8-pin electrical plug. The locomotive weighs 20.2 ounces by itself. The tender weighs 7.1 ounces. After several attempts, I measured a peak 7 ounces even of drawbar pull on my force gauge. Some time ago I measured over 9 ounces, but I was not able to duplicate that result this time around. I'm running the engine on DCC. I haven't changed any of the factory settings except the address, which I set to 2584. The front headlight is activated with the F0 key and comes on in the forward direction. The light is dim when the engine is stopped and gets brighter when it's moving. The rear headlight is dim when the engine is stopped regardless of direction. It goes out when the engine moves forward and gets brighter when the engine moves backward. One thing I find a little odd is that the cab lights are on when the engine is stopped and go out when the engine moves. There doesn't seem to be any way to control them. The class lights are not functional. Let's take a look at the final result. One of the number boards is crooked, so I took 5 points in the paint and detail category. The model has 2 low couplers, and the tender only uses some of its wheels to pick up current, so I took a total of 15 points in the standards and operation category. That leaves us with 80 out of 100 possible points, which would be a B- on a report card. Overall, this is a nice engine, and I feel comfortable giving it a green signal. Broadway Limited's Great Northern 484 is a pretty nice model, even though it has a couple small shortcomings. If you're a fan of GN Steam, I think you'll like this one.